Watch your step. Places like this don't take kindly to people like you. Harrison Cole smirked. Olivia Carter stood a few feet away, silver serving tray balanced against her hip, eyes already moving to the next table. She had learned not to stare. Staring invited trouble. Her black uniform carried the faint scent of fine wine and aromatic herbs, the kind that never quite washed out. She'd been on her feet since 6, and her calves burned with the dull ache of someone who knew exactly how many hours were left in the shift. Harrison Cole occupied the center booth of the VIP section like a man who had paid for the right to exist there. His tailored jacket lay beside him, untouched. His Rolex caught the light whenever he lifted his hand, not accidentally. He was in his early 50s, silver threading through his temples, relaxed in the way men got when consequences had stopped applying to them. People adjusted around him without realizing they were doing it. Across from him sat a young woman Olivia didn't recognize. Maybe early 20s, posture stiff, smile forced. Harrison leaned in closer than necessary, his voice dropping just enough to suggest privacy without offering any. "So," he said, eyes moving over her in a way that made Olivia slow her step. "You always come here alone. Or am I just lucky tonight?" The girl laughed nervously, looked down at her drink. Her shoulders pulled inward, a small, familiar movement Olivia recognized immediately. Olivia stopped beside the table. "Sir?" she said calmly, keeping her voice even. "Please don't speak to customers like that." The room shifted, subtle but real. A pause, a recalculation. Harrison looked up at her, surprised, then amused. His smile widened, slow and deliberate. "You her mother?" he asked lightly. "Or is that part of the service now?" "I'm just asking you to be respectful," Olivia said. Her heart was already beating faster than she wanted it to. She knew the rules. She knew what usually happened next. The young woman seized the opening, mumbling something about the restroom and sliding out of the booth. She didn't look back. Harrison watched her go, then returned his attention to Olivia. His expression hardened just a fraction. Not enough for anyone to call it anger. Enough to make a point. "Don't lecture me," he said. "You serve the courses. That's your job." Olivia nodded once. "I understand, sir." The apology was right there, waiting. She swallowed it and turned away. She didn't see his foot move. Harrison extended his leg into the aisle as Olivia passed. Precise, measured. When her heel caught, it felt less like a trip and more like a sudden betrayal by the floor itself. Her body pitched forward. The tray lurched. Glasses slid, then fell. The crash was sharp and final. Crystal shattered. Liquid splattered across the polished marble. Olivia caught herself against the booth, her shoulder slamming hard into the edge. Pain flared white-hot down her arm. The dining room silent for half a second. Then Harrison laughed. It wasn't loud, but it didn't need to be. "Careful," he said, shaking his head. "You people are always in such a hurry." A few patrons chuckled. Uncertain but compliant. Others stared down at their drinks. No one spoke. Olivia stood there, breath shallow, heart pounding so hard it made her dizzy. Her shoulder throbbed. Her wrist burned where it had twisted trying to save the tray. She looked at the foot still stretched into the aisle, then at Harrison's face. "Sir," she said, her voice trembling despite her effort. "You stuck your leg out." Harrison raised both hands in mock surrender. "Why would I do that?" he said. "Everyone saw it. You tripped." Near the service station, Derek Sloan finally moved. He strode over, jaw tight, eyes already narrowed at Olivia. "What the hell are you doing?" he snapped. "I tripped," Olivia said quickly, the words tumbling out. He put his foot out. "I wasn't." Derek didn't let her finish. "You embarrassed a VIP customer," he barked. "You dropped glasses. You caused a scene. Again." "I tried to warn him," Olivia said, her hands shaking now. "He was bothering that girl." And then, before she could finish, Derek shoved her hard in the shoulder, the exact spot that had just been slammed. The pain exploded, stealing her breath. She stumbled back, hitting the bar counter. A sharp cry escaped her before she could stop it. "Don't you lie in my restaurant," Derek shouted. "You think anyone's going to believe you over him?" Olivia sagged slightly, clutching her arm. Tears blurred her vision. "I'm telling the truth," she whispered. "Please." "I didn't mean to." Derek struck her again, this time across the side of her arm. Not enough to break anything, enough to leave no doubt. "Shut up," he said. "Clean this up before you hurt someone else." The lounge watched, some faces uncomfortable, some blank. No one intervened. Olivia knelt slowly, wincing as she gathered broken pieces with trembling fingers. Her shoulder screamed with every movement. Blood from a small cut on her palm smeared faintly across the floor. She tried to explain again. quietly, words spilling out between shallow breaths, but Derek had already turned away. Harrison leaned back in his booth, satisfied. His foot withdrew beneath the table as if it had never been there. At the far corner of dining hall, a man sat alone in the shadows. His whiskey sat untouched, amber liquid catching the dim light. He had seen the girl shrink. He had seen the foot extend. He had seen the shove, the strike, the way truth had been crushed beneath convenience. Olivia finally managed to stand, her arm limp at her side, her body trembling despite her efforts to control it. She avoided everyone's eyes as she carried the broken glass toward the back. The silence returned thicker now, heavier, but it no longer felt stable. The man in the corner set his glass down carefully, aligning it with the edge of the table. He stood, not quickly, not dramatically, just decisively. His name was Vincent Moretti, and in this city, that name meant something. Olivia felt the shift without understanding it as she disappeared through the staff door. For the first time that night, she sensed that the silence behind her was no longer whole. If this story moved you, hit that like button and let me know. Share it with someone who needs to hear that silence isn't safety. And subscribe because this is just the beginning. The staff room door slammed shut behind Olivia, a blunt, dry sound that echoed through the cramped space. She pressed her back to the wall, breathing hard, her shoulder throbbing in waves as if someone were dragging a knife through flesh. Her hand trembled as she looked down at the cut in her palm. Blood still seeped out, staining the lines of her hand a dark, living red. She bit her lip and swallowed her tears. Don't cry. Not here. Not now. She'd learned not to cry a long time ago. From the nights her mother lay in a hospital bed. From the days she worked 2 jobs just to pay for medicine. Tears didn't fix anything. Tears only made people think she was weak. And she wasn't allowed to be weak. The door swung open. Derek Sloan stepped in, his face cold as stone. He didn't look at the wound in her hand. He didn't ask if it hurt. He only stood there with his arms folded across his chest and spoke in a voice that held not a trace of feeling. Mr. Cole wants you to apologize. Publicly. Right now. Olivia lifted her head. For a brief moment, she saw herself in the old, worn mirror hanging on the wall. A woman with hair fallen loose, a uniform smeared and dirty, her shoulder drawn in tight from the pain. But her eyes weren't dead. Her eyes still held fire. No. One word. But it rolled through the small room like thunder. Derek narrowed his eyes, plainly not expecting she'd dare refuse. But before he could say anything else, another sound drifted in from outside. Whispers, the scrape of a chair, footsteps, and then silence. A silence unlike the one before. Heavier, more frightening, as if the entire place had stopped breathing. Outside, Vincent Moretti had risen. He moved slowly, each step landing with steady weight on the marble floor. No hurry. He didn't need to hurry. Behind him, Marcus Webb shifted like a shadow, wordless, blocking the only exit of the VIP section. No one was allowed to leave. Not yet. The guests in the lounge began to understand. A man leaned toward his companion, his voice a whisper, yet loud enough for those nearby to hear. Vincent Moretti, the Moretti family. The name spread like an unseen current. Those who knew went pale, those who didn't watched the faces of the ones who did. And fear found them too. Because in this city, the name Moretti wasn't just a name, it was a warning. Harrison Cole was still sitting in his booth, a smug smile still clinging to his mouth. He hadn't realized, or maybe he had, but he didn't believe it. He didn't believe anyone would dare touch him. He didn't believe consequences still existed in his world. Vincent stopped directly in front of the table. He didn't sit. He only stood there, looking down at Harrison with eyes cold as ice. Harrison looked up, and for the first time, his smile faltered. Just a little. But Vincent saw it. Moretti. Harrison tried to keep his voice normal, even forced a polite, social smile. It's been a while. Sit down, have a drink, stand up. 2 words. Not a request, not a suggestion. An order. Vincent's voice wasn't loud, but it cut through every other sound in the room. Harrison blinked. He looked around for support, but no one dared meet his eyes. Even the people who'd been laughing with him minutes earlier were now staring hard into the bottoms of their glasses. And then, slowly, Harrison Cole stood. For the first time that night, someone had given him a command, and he obeyed. Vincent stepped closer. 1 step. 2. Until he stood right in front of Harrison, close enough to catch the scent of expensive cognac on the man's breath. Then, without warning, Vincent seized Harrison's wrist. He tightened his grip. Not much. Just enough to hear the faint crack of bone beneath skin. Harrison sucked in a sharp breath, his face blanching in an instant. He wanted to scream, to call for someone. But when he looked into Vincent's eyes, every sound died in his throat. "Do you know what happens to the last person who thought he could lay a hand on what I'm looking at?" Vincent asked, his tone as light as if he were talking about the weather. Harrison didn't answer. He didn't need to, because he knew. This whole city knew. Vincent held his gaze for 1 second, 2 seconds, 3. Then he let go. As if Harrison wasn't worth dirtying his hands any further, he turned and started to walk away, and the entire room seemed to exhale. But before he reached the door, Vincent stopped. He looked toward the staff door, where Olivia had disappeared. He didn't know why he looked. He didn't know why the image of that girl, kneeling on the floor to gather broken glass with bleeding hands, refused to leave his mind. Marcus moved to his side, his voice low. "She doesn't belong to our world." Vincent didn't turn around. He kept staring at that door, as if he could see through it, as if he could see her standing in that small room, alone, carrying a kind of pain no one cared to notice. "I know," he said, but he kept looking. A long while later, Vincent finally turned away. He walked out into the cold night, Marcus close behind. Only after they were seated inside the glossy black SUV parked along the curb did Vincent speak again. "Find everything on Harrison Cole. Everything he's hiding. Everyone he's ever laid a hand on." Marcus nodded, his hand already reaching for his phone. But Vincent wasn't finished. "And her." Marcus paused, looking at his boss with a flicker of confusion. But he didn't ask. He never asked. He only nodded and began to make the call. The vehicle rolled into the night, leaving behind a lounge drowning in terrible silence, a billionaire trembling as he rubbed a bruised wrist, and a woman in the staff room, who still didn't know that her life was about to change forever. The next morning, Olivia arrived at the Velvet Manor, with her shoulder still aching in a dull, persistent throb, and the cut on her hand wrapped in a cheap piece of gauze she'd bought at the small grocery store near her apartment. She thought last night was over. She thought all she had to do was keep her head down, do her work, and let everything pass the way it always passed. She was used to swallowing humiliation. She was used to pretending nothing had happened. But the moment she stepped through the door, Derek Sloan was already waiting, his face cold as ice. "My office," he said, not meeting her eyes. The small service station still held the stale stink of dampness and old smoke. Derek closed the door, turned to her, and looked at her with an expression emptied of feeling. "You're fired." 4 words, short, clean, merciless, as if she were nothing more than a broken object meant to be tossed away. Olivia stood there with the sensation that someone had pulled all the air out of her lungs. She wanted to ask why, but she knew why. She wanted to say she hadn't done anything wrong, but she knew that didn't matter. In places like this, the truth never mattered as much as money. "Mr. Cole called the owner," Derek went on, his tone even, like he was reading from a report. "But if you keep quiet, I can get you a stipend, 2 months' pay, enough to start over somewhere else." Olivia looked at him, looked into the eyes of the man who'd shoved her, hit her, and was now standing here offering money so she'd forget all of it. "No," she said. 1 word, just like last night. Derek lifted his eyebrows, clearly not expecting she'd refuse. "You should rethink it. No money, no job, you won't survive in this city." Olivia didn't answer. She only turned, opened the door, and walked out. She didn't look back. Outside, snow was falling. White flakes blanketed the sidewalk, the rooftops, the thin fabric of Olivia's coat. She stood there, right in front of the Velvet Manor, the place where she'd worked for 2 years, and she didn't know where to go. Home, to that tiny studio on the south side, with rent already 2 weeks overdue. Look for a new job, when who would hire someone just fired from one of the most prestigious restaurants in the city? Her phone vibrated in her pocket. She pulled it out and stared at the screen. A message from the bank. "Your payment for this month is past due. Please pay within 7 days to avoid late fees." $87,000. That was what she owed. Her mother's hospital bills, medication, the nights she'd sat by the bed, holding her mother's hand, praying for a miracle that never came. Her mother had been gone for 2 years, but the debt was still there. It would be there forever, like a noose tightening around her throat, a little more each day. Her phone vibrated again. This time, a call. The name on the screen was Lucas, her younger brother. Olivia drew a deep breath, trying to steady her voice before she answered. "Sis," Lucas's voice burst through, bright with excitement. "I got an A in anatomy. The professor even praised me in front of the whole class." Olivia felt her heart melt and break at the same time. Her little brother. 19 years old. A pre-med student in college. The only dream she'd managed to keep alive. "That's my boy," she said, and her voice sounded so normal she wondered how she could pretend that well. "I'm proud of you. Are you okay? You sound weird." "I'm just tired," she lied. "Late shift last night." She was used to lying to him, lying that everything was fine, lying that she was okay, lying that she wasn't drowning. "Make sure you eat, okay? Don't worry about me. Take care of yourself." Lucas said it with a warmth that carried real concern. Olivia smiled, even though he couldn't see it. "I will. You keep studying hard. I love you. I love you too." She ended the call, and then, standing there in the falling snow, Olivia came apart. Tears spilled out, unstoppable, mixing with the cold flakes on her cheeks. She wasn't crying because she'd lost her job. She wasn't crying because she'd been hit. She was crying because of her brother's voice, because of the pure joy in it, because she knew that if she went under, he'd never graduate. She sank down onto the steps of a closed storefront, her shoulders shaking in waves, and she cried. She was used to breaking. She was used to picking up the shattered pieces of her life and trying to fit them back together. But this time, she didn't know what was left to pick up. This time, she didn't know if she still had the strength to stand again. Not far away, a black SUV sat parked at the curb, the engine humming softly to keep the cabin warm. Inside, Vincent Moretti sat in the back seat, looking through tinted glass at the woman crying alone in the snow. His hand curled into a tight fist, the knuckles gone white. He wanted to get out. He wanted to walk to her, tell her everything would be all right. But he didn't. He only sat there, watched her cry, and felt something he'd believed dead a long time ago stir inside his chest. Marcus sat in the front seat, watching his boss in the rearview mirror. "Why don't you help her?" he asked, his voice low. Vincent was silent for a long time. Then he spoke, his voice deep and unhurried. "Because she doesn't need a savior. She needs someone who believes her." Marcus didn't understand, but he didn't ask again. He'd worked for Vincent long enough to know there were things that didn't need explaining. Out there, Olivia finally stood. She wiped her tears with the back of her hand, drew in a deep breath, and started walking, not knowing where she was going, but still walking, because it was the only thing she knew how to do. Keep walking, even when she no longer knew what road lay ahead. Vincent watched her until her figure disappeared around the corner. Then he turned to Marcus. "Set up a meeting. Let her choose." Marcus nodded, not asking who the meeting was with or what it was for. He only took out his phone and began to work. The black SUV pulled away, leaving behind tire marks that softened and faded on the white snow. And Olivia kept walking, not knowing someone was watching her, not knowing her life was about to turn in a completely different direction, not knowing that in the darkness, a man had decided she deserved more than this. 2 days passed like 2 years. Olivia sat in a small coffee shop on a street corner, the cup in front of her long gone cold, and she didn't bother to order another. She didn't have the money to order another. On the table, beside the cup, lay a piece of paper covered in messy scribbles, 5 names and 5 phone numbers. 5 places she'd called looking for work, 5 rejections. Some places turned her down bluntly the moment they heard her name. Others were more polite, saying they'd get back to her, but she knew they never would. Harrison Cole had called ahead. He'd made sure no one in this city would dare hire her. That was how men like him operated. They didn't ruin you once. They made sure you could never get back on your feet again. The cafe door chimed softly as someone came in. Olivia didn't lift her head. She was too tired to care about anything around her. But then, a shadow stopped right at her table. And then, without a word of permission, the person pulled out the chair and sat down across from her. Olivia raised her head, ready to tell the stranger the seat was taken, even though it wasn't. But the words froze in her throat when she saw who was sitting there. A man in a black suit, eyes that held a deadly, unshakable calm, and a presence that took her straight back to that night at the Velvet Manor. The man who'd stood when she disappeared into the staff room. The man who'd made the entire lounge fall silent when he walked. "I know who you are," Olivia said, her voice steadier than she expected. "Moretti." Vincent didn't look surprised. He only watched her, his eyes giving away nothing. "Then you know I'm dangerous." It wasn't a question. It was a statement, a warning. Most people would have trembled hearing that from Vincent Moretti. Most people would have looked for the quickest way out, but Olivia wasn't most people. She'd lived through too much to be afraid of threats. "I've lived with dangerous," she said, her voice not shaking at all. "You don't scare me." Vincent blinked, just once, quick as a flash, but Olivia saw it. Surprise. Not many people spoke to him like that. Maybe no one ever had. Silence stretched between them. Olivia didn't speak. She just sat there, meeting his gaze, waiting. She didn't know what he wanted. She didn't know why he was here. But she wasn't going to be the one to speak first. Harrison Cole has done this to a lot of people, Vincent finally said, his voice deep and unhurried. Not just you. There are others. More than you think. A chill ran down Olivia's spine. But it wasn't fear. It was anger, disgust, the knowledge that she wasn't the only victim, and that somehow made everything worse. I want him to pay, Vincent continued, his eyes never leaving hers. And I think you do too. Olivia was quiet for a moment, tilting her head as she studied him. Why do you care? She asked. I'm just a server. You're Moretti. What happens to me has nothing to do with you. Vincent didn't answer right away. For the first time since he sat down, she saw something shift in his eyes. A flicker of hesitation, an empty space. As if someone had asked him a question he didn't have an answer ready for. And that, more than anything else, caught Olivia's attention. Because men like Vincent Moretti always had an answer ready. They always knew what they wanted and why. They didn't hesitate. They didn't go quiet. But he was quiet. Because I've stood and watched when I shouldn't have stood and watched, Vincent finally said, his voice lower now, as if he were speaking to himself more than to her. And I don't want to do that anymore. Olivia looked into his eyes. Really looked. And for the first time, she saw something behind the coldness. Not the cruelty people whispered about. Not the danger carried by the name Moretti. But pain. Old, deep, and hidden so carefully that maybe even he didn't know it was still there. You're hiding something, she said, her voice softer. Not an accusation, just an observation. Vincent looked at her, and for a moment she thought he might stand up and walk away. But he didn't. Instead, he spoke. A lot of things, he admitted, his tone not defensive at all. But not from you. The words hung between them, heavy and full of meaning. Olivia didn't know how to respond. She didn't know why a man like Vincent Moretti was speaking to her this way. As if he trusted her. As if she mattered. Vincent stood, and Olivia understood the conversation was over. But before he left, he reached into his jacket pocket, took out a business card, and set it down on the table in front of her. The card was black. No name. No title. Only a string of phone numbers printed in silver ink. Call me when you decide, he said. Then he turned and walked away without looking back. The bell chimed as he left the cafe, and Olivia sat there alone, the card on the table like an invitation into a world she knew nothing about. She picked it up and turned it over in her fingers. Black, cold, secretive, like the man who'd just been sitting across from her. She should throw it away. She should forget this conversation ever happened. She should stay far from Vincent Moretti and everything tied to him. But as she slipped the card into her coat pocket, she realized her heart was beating faster than normal, and not only from fear. There was something else. Something she didn't dare name. Something in the way he'd looked at her. As if she weren't a victim to be pitied, but an equal who deserved respect. Something in the way he'd said, but not from you, as if she were special, as if she were different. Olivia stared out the window, where Vincent's silhouette had vanished long ago, and for the first time in many days, she wondered if her life could change. Late at night, Vincent Moretti's penthouse sat atop the highest floor of a building in the Gold Coast, looking down over the city of Chicago the way a king looks down on his kingdom. But Vincent wasn't standing at the windows, taking in the view. He sat behind a black oak desk, the lamp casting hard shadows across a face made of angles, and in front of him lay a thick stack of files Marcus had just set down. Harrison Cole, Marcus said, his voice even, as if he were reading out a death sentence. Everything we found. Vincent said nothing. He only opened the folder and began to read. The first page was Harrison's photo, smiling brilliantly at a charity gala, an arm wrapped around an oversized donation check. Billionaire, philanthropist, the darling of Chicago's upper class. The second page was a list. 7 names, 7 women, 7 buried stories. The first victim, 10 years ago, a 22-year-old intern, paid $200,000 to stay quiet. The second victim, a year after that, a receptionist at Harrison's hotel, $50,000 and a non-disclosure agreement. The third, the fourth, the fifth. The numbers climbed. The hush money grew larger. A team of lawyers hired to wipe every trace clean. Vincent turned to the next page and stopped. The sixth victim, 24 years old. She didn't take the money. She tried to report him. Harrison and his legal team destroyed her reputation, called her a liar, called her an extortionist, 6 months later, she killed herself. No one was prosecuted. No one was held accountable. Only a small line in a local paper, and then the world forgot, as if she had never existed. Vincent closed the file. He didn't need to read more. He'd seen enough. He sat in silence, but his mind was no longer in this room. It was drifting back into the past, to a day he'd tried to forget for 20 years and had never been able to. 15 years old, he stood before his mother's casket, a black suit too large for the thin frame of a child who hadn't had time to grow. The church was packed, but he saw only one person. The man in the back row. The man who'd killed his mother. The man who was smiling as if the death of a woman were nothing more than a small inconvenience that had been handled. 23 years old. He saw that man again. The same smile. The same smug certainty. But this time, Vincent wasn't a helpless child. This time, when he walked away, the man wasn't smiling anymore. The man wasn't breathing. Vincent didn't regret that night. He only regretted waiting so long. 8 years. 8 years for his mother to lie beneath cold ground, while her killer still lived, still laughed, still breathed. 8 years was too long. He wouldn't let it happen again. Handle Harrison the old way? Marcus's voice pulled him back to the present. Vincent opened his eyes. He hadn't realized he'd closed them. No, he said, his voice low and cold. He doesn't deserve to die that fast. Marcus fell silent, waiting. He knew his boss wasn't finished. Harrison Cole likes living in the light, Vincent continued, his gaze settling on the photo of the billionaire smiling wide. He likes being admired, praised by the press, celebrated by society. Then let that light burn him. Let the whole world see who he really is. Death is too easy. Humiliation is the punishment he deserves. Marcus nodded, understanding. Then he produced another folder, much thinner, and set it on the desk. And this is on her, Olivia Carter. Vincent picked it up, and the first thing he saw was a photograph. Not a candid shot, but the picture from her old employee file. Gray, blue eyes staring straight at the camera, not smiling, not sad, only the steadiness of someone who'd learned to fight alone. He kept reading. 27 years old. Mother died 2 years ago from cancer. Hospital debt of $87,000. A 19-year-old brother in medical school. 2 jobs, server at night and grocery cashier by day. No criminal history. No scandals. Only a life full of hardship. And a woman who refused to go down. She's clean, Marcus said. Nothing for Harrison to use against her. Vincent set the folder down, but his eyes stayed on the photograph. She's not clean, he said. And his voice shifted slightly, softer, as if he were speaking to himself. She's strong. That's different. Marcus said nothing, but he noticed something in his boss's eyes. Something he'd never seen in all the years they'd worked together. Something that looked like concern, real concern. Vincent went quiet for a long time, his gaze still fixed on Olivia's photograph. Then he spoke again, his voice returning to its usual cold certainty. Contact Diana Cross, the reporter who's been chasing Harrison for 3 years. Tell her I have what she needs. Marcus nodded, his hand already reaching for his phone. But Vincent wasn't finished. And pay her debt. Marcus stopped, staring at his boss in surprise. 87,000. She won't accept. Vincent didn't look at Marcus. He kept looking at Olivia's photograph, at those gray-blue eyes that held their ground. And he thought of her sitting alone in that coffee shop. Thought of the way she'd met his gaze and said she wasn't afraid. Then don't let her know, he said. Marcus watched him for a long moment, as if trying to read something on his boss's expressionless face. But he didn't ask. He never asked. He only nodded and stepped out, leaving Vincent alone in the dark room with the stack of files and a photograph he couldn't stop looking at. Outside the windows, Chicago lay drowned in night, millions of lights glittering like stars fallen to earth. And somewhere in that city, Olivia Carter slept uneasily, not knowing her life was about to change forever. Olivia's studio apartment sat on the 3rd floor of an old building on the south side, where the elevator was broken more often than it worked, and the walls were so thin she could hear the neighbor's television every night. But tonight, she didn't hear anything at all. She sat on the bed in the dark, holding the black business card Vincent had given her 2 days ago. The phone number printed in silver ink glimmered under the streetlight spilling in through the window. She'd turned that card over hundreds of times. She'd picked up her phone and set it down dozens of times. She didn't know what she was afraid of. Afraid of Vincent. No, she'd told the truth when she said he didn't scare her. Afraid of Harrison Cole. Maybe. But fear wasn't what made her hesitate. What made her hesitate was that she didn't know if she was strong enough to fight. She'd been fighting her whole life. Fighting to survive. Fighting so Lucas could stay in school. Fighting to pay her mother's hospital bills. And now, with her mother gone, with her job gone, with every door slammed shut in her face, she didn't know what she had left to fight for. Her eyes drifted to the photograph on the nightstand. Her mother, taken on her last birthday, thin and pale from chemotherapy, but still smiling, always smiling. Olivia remembered the last night. Her mother's hand wrapped around hers, her voice weak but still firm. Don't ever let someone make you think you're not worth listening to, Olivia. You have a voice. Use it. Tears rose, impossible to stop. She closed her eyes, let them slide down her cheeks, and heard her mother's voice echoing in her mind. Don't be quiet. Don't let them think they can grind you down. Don't let them win. When she opened her eyes, her hand was already holding her phone. And this time, she didn't set it down. She dialed the number. The safe apartment was in a discreet building in Lincoln Park, with no name on the buzzer and no obvious cameras. But Olivia knew someone was watching from the moment she stepped out of the taxi. Marcus met her in the lobby and escorted her silently to the penthouse, where Vincent was already waiting. The apartment on the 12th floor was spacious and spare, with white walls and gray furniture. And sitting on the sofa, already waiting, was a woman in her mid-30s, short hair, sharp eyes, a laptop open in front of her, a pen tapping a steady rhythm against her thigh. Diana Cross. The woman stood and offered her hand. Investigative reporter. I've been tracking Harrison Cole for 3 years. Olivia shook her hand, recognizing at once that this was someone who knew exactly what she was doing, not the kind of reporter chasing cheap headlines, someone who genuinely wanted the truth. I know what happened to you, Diana said, direct but not unkind. Mr. Moretti provided information, but I need you to tell it. Officially. On camera or in writing. You're the final piece I need. Olivia listened without interrupting. She listened as Diana spoke of 7 victims, of hush money, of the girl who took her own life, of how Harrison Cole had slipped free for 10 years because no one dared speak. And when Diana finished, Olivia said only one sentence. I'm ready to tell my story. Diana looked at her, and for the first time, that hard-edged reporter smiled. Not a smile of victory, but a smile of respect. Thank you, she said. I'll reach out in the next few days to arrange the formal interview. Diana left, and Olivia and Vincent were alone in the quiet apartment. Olivia stood by the window, looking down at the city glittering beneath them, and she could feel Vincent behind her, not too close, but close enough that she knew he was there. You could destroy Harrison without me, she said, not turning around. I know you could. With everything you have, you could make him disappear and no one would know. So why do you need me to speak? Vincent was silent for a moment. Then he stepped up beside her and looked out the window too. Because I can make him afraid, he said, his voice low. But only you can make him ashamed. Olivia turned to look at him, and for the first time, she saw Vincent looking at her. Really looking. Not the cold, calculating stare he gave the rest of the world. The look of a man telling the truth. And you deserve to reclaim justice with your own hands, he continued. Not receive it from anyone, not from me, not from anyone else. You deserve to stand up and tell the whole world you're not a victim. You're a survivor. Olivia met his eyes and saw something behind the coldness. Something soft. Something that had been hidden for so long even he didn't know it was still there. You're not like I thought, she said quietly. Vincent looked at her, and for a moment his expression eased. Neither are you. They stood there by the window in silence. No more words were needed. Then Olivia turned to the table where Diana had left a written statement for her to sign. Olivia picked up the pen, and without hesitation, she signed her name. When she left, stepping through the door, her hand brushed Vincent's. Just a second, just a moment. But they both knew. They both felt it, and neither of them said a word. 3 days after Olivia signed the written statement, Diana Cross called to say someone else wanted to speak up. Not one person, but 3. The safe apartment in Lincoln Park became, once again, a place where buried stories were brought back into the light. Olivia arrived early, sat on the familiar gray sofa, and waited. She didn't know what she was waiting for. Maybe confirmation that she wasn't the only one. Maybe hope that she wasn't alone in this fight. The door opened, and the first person to step inside was a young woman Olivia recognized instantly. Sophia Laurent, the girl who had been sitting across from Harrison Cole on that fateful night. The girl who had fled into the restroom when Olivia spoke up to protect her. Sophia looked different from that night. No more seductive red dress, no more dark lipstick. She wore an oversized sweater, her hair pulled up, and beneath her eyes lay the bruised shadows of someone who hadn't slept for many nights. "I went to Miss Cross after I read about you online," Sophia said to Diana, her voice soft but steady. "I know you're investigating Harrison Cole, and I want to help." Diana nodded and gestured to the empty chair. "Tell me." Sophia sat down, and she began to speak. Not about the night at the Velvet Manor, but about the nights that came after. About how Harrison found her phone number, called her at 2 o'clock in the morning, said things that made her afraid to turn off the light when she tried to sleep. About how he showed up at the cafe she went to, at the gym where she worked out, in the parking lot of the building where she lived. Never doing anything, only appearing, only watching, only letting her know he could reach her whenever he wanted. "I haven't slept since that night," Sophia said, her eyes lowered to the hands clenched tight in her lap. "But I don't want to stay silent just so I can sleep. I want him to pay." Olivia looked at Sophia and saw herself in the young woman's eyes. The fear, the anger, and the refusal to go down. The door opened again, and the second woman stepped in. Emma Sullivan, 31 years old, wearing a gray business suit, hair pinned into a neat bun, looking like an ordinary office worker. But when she sat down and lifted a hand to smooth her hair, Olivia saw them. Faint scars on her wrists, old, healed, but still there, like a reminder of the darkest night of her life. "5 years ago," Emma began, her voice so calm it was frightening, as if she'd told this story 1,000 times in her head. "I was Harrison Cole's assistant. I thought it was the biggest opportunity of my life. I was wrong." She didn't go into details. She didn't need to. Everyone in the room understood. "After I refused to stay silent, he destroyed me," Emma continued. "I lost my job. I lost my home. I lost friends. His lawyers called me a liar, an extortionist, a whore trying to climb by accusing a decent man." She raised her hand and touched her wrist lightly, touched the old scars. "I tried to end it all, but I failed. And when I woke up in the hospital, I realized I didn't want to die. I wanted to live. I wanted to live long enough to watch him fall." She looked around the room, into each pair of eyes. "I survived for this day." No one spoke. There was nothing to say. The door opened one last time, and the third woman stepped in. Nicole Ward, 28 years old, didn't come alone. She carried a child. A little girl about 2 years old, curly-haired, wide-eyed, sleeping with her cheek pressed to her mother's shoulder. Nicole didn't say much. She simply sat down, settled the child in her lap, and pulled a photograph from her bag. A picture of the baby at birth, tiny and red and new. She set the photograph on the table, directly in front of Diana. 3 years ago, Nicole said, her voice low and rough, "Harrison promised to help me advance my career. He said I had potential. He said he could help me." She looked down at the child asleep in her arms. "This is what came from the night he helped my career." No one dared breathe. Nicole stared at the photograph on the table, then lifted her gaze, her eyes dry but filled with resolve. "For her," she said. Only 2 words, but those 2 words held everything. 4 women sat in the quiet room. Olivia, Sophia, Emma, Nicole. 4 different stories, and the same perpetrator. 4 lives damaged, but not erased. 4 voices that had been silenced, and were now ready to shout. Olivia looked at them, one by one, and she spoke. "Alone, we're stories they can dismiss. They'll say we're lying. They'll say we want money. They'll say we're jealous, unstable, hateful. Alone, we don't stand a chance." Emma nodded and continued for her. "But together, we're a truth they can't deny. Together, we're living proof. Together, we're Harrison Cole's worst nightmare." Sophia and Nicole nodded. No more was needed. They understood each other now. Diana stood, looking at the 4 women in front of her with deep respect. "We have witnesses," she said. 4 brave women willing to stand up. "That's what I've been waiting for all these years." She paused, and her tone turned more serious. "But now we need physical evidence. Words against words won't be enough in court. We need something he can't deny." The 4 women looked at one another. They'd made it halfway, but the road ahead was the hardest part. Harrison Cole hadn't become a billionaire by sitting still and waiting. He had eyes and ears everywhere in this city. People willing to sell any scrap of information in exchange for money or favor. And when rumors of an investigation began to reach him, when the name Diana Cross surfaced alongside the name Vincent Moretti, Harrison knew he was being hunted. But a predator never accepts becoming prey without a fight. He sat in his office, staring out through the glass at the city of Chicago below, and he began to plan. If he couldn't touch Moretti, he would touch what Moretti was protecting. If he couldn't silence everyone, He would frighten them until they silenced themselves, and he knew exactly where to begin. Olivia Carter. The girl who dared to speak first. The girl with one clear weakness he could exploit. Olivia's phone vibrated at 11 o'clock at night. An unknown number. She hadn't planned to answer, but something made her pick up. Maybe instinct, maybe curiosity, or maybe fate. Stop. The voice on the other end was low and distorted, clearly altered through a device. If you know what's good for you, stop. Olivia felt the blood in her body turn to ice, but she didn't hang up. She didn't say a word. She only listened. Your brother, Lucas, right? Pre-med student. Dorm on the north side of campus. He likes walking back by the shortcut behind the library at 9 o'clock at night. The voice continued, slow, as if savoring every syllable. It'd be a shame if he never graduated. The line went dead. Olivia sat there with the phone still pressed to her ear, her body locked in place like stone. Lucas. They knew about Lucas. They knew where he studied, where he lived, which way he walked. They could reach him any time they wanted. Her heart hammered wild. Her hands shook so hard she nearly dropped the phone. She had to call Lucas. She had to warn him. She dialed his number, and each ring felt like a century. Sis. Lucas's voice came through, but it wasn't his usual bright voice. It was frightened. Sis, someone's following me. What? Where are you? Olivia shouted, her heart trying to leap out of her chest. I'm at the library. There's a black car parked outside. It's been there for 2 hours. And there's a man who's been tailing me since the cafeteria. I don't know what to do. I'm scared, sis. Tears spilled down Olivia's cheeks. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't think. All she could see was Lucas's face, the brother she'd sacrificed everything to protect, now trembling because of her. Listen to me. Don't go anywhere alone. Stay inside the library. Stay where there are people. I'm calling someone right now. She ended the call and immediately dialed the number on the black card. Vincent answered on the first ring. Olivia? Just hearing his voice shattered something in her. Words poured out in a broken rush, tangled and stammering between sobs. She told him about the anonymous call, about Lucas, about the fear tightening around her throat. Vincent listened without interrupting. And when she finished, his voice came through calm and certain, like an oath. Marcus is going to Lucas right now. Your brother will be safe. I promise. Olivia cried hard. Her knees gave out, and she sank onto the cold floor of her rundown apartment. I can't, she whispered through the sobs. I can't let my brother get hurt because of me. I can't. Where are you? Vincent asked. I'm coming. 20 minutes later, there was a knock at the door. Olivia opened it, eyes swollen and red, her body still shaking, and Vincent was there. He didn't speak. He only stepped inside, closed the door behind him, and looked at her. The apartment was tiny, the furniture worn, the walls peeling. But Vincent didn't look at any of it. He looked only at her, and for the first time in his life, Vincent Moretti didn't know what to say. He'd faced enemies, made life and death decisions, stared into the eyes of death without blinking. But standing in front of a woman crying because she was terrified of losing her brother, he was utterly powerless, so he said nothing. He sat down beside her on the old frayed sofa, and he stayed, silent, present. Marcus picked Lucas up. He finally said, his voice gentler than usual. Your brother is in a safe place. No one can touch him. Olivia nodded, but the tears kept coming. She didn't look at him. She stared down at her hands, clenched tight in her lap. I won't let anyone touch your brother, Vincent continued, his voice shaped like a vow. Or you. Olivia turned to him, her eyes red and lost. Why? She asked, her voice rough. Why do you care this much? I'm nobody to you. I've got nothing to give you. Why are you doing all of this? Vincent didn't answer right away. He looked into her eyes, and in the darkness of the small apartment she saw something in his gaze she'd never seen before. Pain, old and deep. Instead of answering, he reached out and took her hand. His hand was warm and strong, closing around her small, trembling fingers. Because the last time I did nothing, he said, his voice low like a confession. I lost the most important person in my life. Olivia didn't ask more. She didn't need to. She only tightened her grip on his hand, and they sat there in the dark, two hands woven together. No kiss, no promises, no declaration of love. Only the presence of two people who'd been hurt too many times, now finding a quiet kind of comfort in each other. Sometimes presence is enough. Sometimes it's enough just to know someone is beside you. Not judging, not demanding, only there. That is enough. They stayed like that for who knows how long. Maybe minutes. maybe hours. Time didn't matter anymore. Then Olivia's phone vibrated, breaking the stillness. She looked at the screen, a message from an unknown number, but she recognized the sender's name. Rachel Nguyen, her former coworker at the Velvet Manor. The girl who'd stood service sideboard that night, who'd seen everything, and had stayed silent. Until now. I've got what you need. Meet me. The small coffee shop in Chinatown was quiet at 10 o'clock at night. Rachel Nguyen was already seated at a corner table when Olivia walked in, both hands clutched around a cloth tote as if it held her very life inside. Rachel looked different from the last time Olivia had seen her at the Velvet Manor. Thinner, paler, dark circles under her eyes, the kind that come from too many nights without sleep. When Olivia sat down across from her, Rachel glanced around nervously, as if she were afraid someone was watching. "Thank you for coming," Rachel said, her voice small and trembling. "I didn't know who else to call." "You said you have something I need," Olivia said, trying to keep her voice steady even as her heart raced. "What is it?" Rachel fell silent for a moment, her hands still gripping the bag. Then she drew a deep breath, as if she were about to jump off a cliff. "I have video," she said. "That night, all of it." Olivia went still. "Video?" "My own camera," Rachel explained, still shaking but more determined now. "My phone. I set it on the sideboard near the service area. I recorded to protect myself, just in case something ever happened to me in that place. I didn't think I'd ever need it. I knew the house cameras would malfunction for a man like Cole, so I hid my phone on the sideboard and hit record." She opened the bag, pulled out an old phone, and set it on the table. "It's all in here. Mr. Cole," sticking his foot out. "You falling. Derek hitting you. Clear. Impossible to deny." Olivia stared at the phone the way someone might stare at buried treasure. This was it. This was the physical evidence Diana needed. This was the thing that could change everything. "Why?" Olivia asked, meeting Rachel's eyes. "Why did you stay quiet all this time? And why are you giving it to me now?" Rachel looked down at her hands, and Olivia saw them trembling. "Because I was scared," she whispered. "Scared of losing my job. Scared Harrison Cole would come for me. Scared of becoming the next victim. I watched them treat you like that and I did nothing. I stood there like a coward." Tears began to slide down Rachel's cheeks. "But then I heard what's happening. About you and the other women standing up. About the investigation. And I realized if I stayed quiet, I wouldn't be any different from Harrison Cole. I'd be part of the problem." She pushed the phone toward Olivia. "If I give you this video, I'll lose everything. Derek will know it was me. Harrison will know it was me. I'll never find work in this city again." Olivia wanted to tell her it was okay, that she didn't have to do this, that they already had enough witnesses. But before she could speak, Rachel shook her head. "Don't tell me I don't have to do this," Rachel said, and suddenly her voice hardened. "I've been quiet too long. I've watched too many wrong things happen, and pretended I didn't see them. Enough. I don't want to wake up every morning and hate myself anymore." Olivia looked at Rachel and saw herself in those tear-filled but resolute eyes. A woman who'd been afraid for too long, and was choosing courage now. Olivia reached across the table and took Rachel's hand. "Thank you," she said. Only 2 words. But Rachel understood. An hour later, Diana Cross sat in the safe apartment, her eyes locked on the laptop screen as the video played. She watched it 3 times, over and over, without saying a word, and when she finally lifted her head, her eyes shone like someone who'd just found gold. "This is everything we need," she said, excitement held tightly in check. "The video is clear. The angle is perfect. It can't be edited. It can't be denied. Harrison Cole sticks his foot out on purpose. Derek Sloan assaults an employee. It's all recorded." She stood and began to pace the room. "I'm calling a lawyer tonight, and I'm calling my editor. The article goes up the day after tomorrow. The video will be released at the same time." Diana stopped and looked at Olivia. "Are you ready? Because once this runs, your life will never be the same again." Olivia nodded. She didn't need to think. "I'm ready." The night before the release, Olivia stood on the balcony of the safe apartment, looking down at Chicago, swallowed by darkness. Snow was falling, soft white flakes dusting the rooftops, the streets, the shimmering lights below. The city looked strangely beautiful, like a Christmas painting, peaceful and still. It was hard to believe that beneath that beauty was a world crowded with men like Harrison Cole. She heard footsteps behind her, and she knew who it was without turning. Vincent stood beside her, looking out at the white curtain of snow. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His presence was enough. "Tomorrow, everything changes," Olivia said. her voice light as wind. Vincent nodded. Are you afraid? Olivia was quiet for a moment, thinking about the question. Was she afraid? Afraid Harrison would retaliate. Afraid the public would judge her. Afraid of failure. Yes, she admitted. I'm afraid. But I'm used to being afraid. My whole life has been a chain of fears. Afraid there wouldn't be enough money. Afraid my mother wouldn't make it. Afraid Lucas would have to leave school. Fear is the only thing I've ever known. She turned to Vincent, and in the dim city light her face looked softer, more gentle. But this time it's different. This time I'm afraid, and I keep going anyway, because there are things worse than fighting, living a whole life in silence. Vincent looked at her, and in that moment he felt something stir in his chest, something he'd believed dead for a long time, since the day his mother lay in her casket, since the day he became the man this city feared. Hope, the girl standing beside him, with gray-blue eyes full of stubborn strength, made him believe the world might not be completely dark. Maybe there were still people worth protecting. Whatever happens, Vincent said, his voice low and certain as a vow, I'll be here. Olivia didn't answer. She didn't need to. She rested her head against his shoulder, and they stood there, two silhouettes in the falling snow, watching the city glitter below. Tomorrow, the fight would begin. But tonight, they had each other. And sometimes, that is all a person needs. That morning, the article hit the front page. The headline was printed in bold, black letters on a white background, like an indictment no one could deny. Chicago's Golden Man. 10 years, 7 women, 1 truth. Beneath the headline was Harrison Cole's face, a photo taken at a charity gala, his radiant smile now looking like a cruel mockery. And beside it was the link to the video. The video Rachel had held onto for so long was now exposed to the whole world. Within the first hour, the video was viewed more than 100,000 times. Within 3 hours, that number jumped to 1 million. The hashtag Justice for Olivia began appearing on every social media platform, climbing to the top of nationwide trending lists. People shared it, commented, raged. Other stories began to surface. Other women who had stayed silent now finding the courage to speak. Major television networks ran nonstop coverage. Experts analyzed, activists condemned. Harrison Cole, the man once praised as a symbol of success and charity, became the most hated man in America in a single morning. Harrison tried to strike back. He held an emergency press conference that afternoon, standing behind a podium in an expensive suit with his familiar, confident smile, declaring it was all an organized smear campaign. But when reporters played the video right there at the press conference, when they asked him to explain why his leg stretched out at the exact moment Olivia walked by, that smile died. He stammered, blamed, and then walked off halfway through in the chaos of dozens of cameras. That was the beginning of the collapse. In the next 24 hours, everything Harrison Cole had built over 30 years turned to ash. Business partners announced they were cutting ties. The board of the charity foundation he'd created voted to remove him from every position. Coal Industries' stock plunged without stopping. And his wife, the woman who had been silent through 20 years of marriage, filed for divorce and released a public statement supporting the victims. Police stepped in on the 3rd day. Harrison was summoned, questioned, and when prosecutors reviewed the evidence, the decision was made. Arrest. No bail, due to a high flight risk and a proven ability to threaten witnesses. The billionaire who had once sat in the most luxurious exclusive tables in the city now sat in a cold cell, wearing an orange prison uniform, and for the first time in his life, no one moved around him to adjust the world to his comfort. On his first night in jail, Harrison lay on the hard bed, staring up at the concrete ceiling, trying to convince himself this was temporary. His lawyers would find a way. His money would fix everything. He still had power. He still had influence. Then a shadow approached his cell. Another inmate, big, scarred, with eyes cold as ice. The man stopped at the bars and looked at Harrison the way you might look at a pathetic insect. Vincent Moretti sends his regards, he said, slow and low. Just one sentence. No specific threat. No description of what would happen. Only a name. But Harrison understood. He understood that even in jail, he wasn't safe. He understood these walls wouldn't protect him from punishment. He understood that every day, every hour, every minute from now on, he'd have to look over his shoulder, would have to wonder if this was the moment. And for the first time in 52 years of life, Harrison Cole knew what real fear was. Not fear of losing money, not fear of losing reputation, fear for his own life. The inmate smiled, a cold smile that didn't reach his eyes, and walked away. Harrison curled up on the bed, knees pulled tight to his chest, and he shook. shook like a child afraid of the dark. Only the darkness he was facing was real. A few miles away, in the safe apartment in Lincoln Park, Olivia's phone vibrated. Diana Cross. They arrested him, Diana said, her voice carrying a hint of exhilaration and deep exhaustion. No bail. He'll stay in jail until trial. Olivia stood by the window, looking out at the city, and she didn't know what she felt. She'd thought this moment would bring joy, satisfaction, victory, but there was nothing like that, only a quiet exhale of relief, as if a 1,000-pound weight had been lifted off her chest. "Thank you, Diana," she said, and ended the call. She scrolled through her contacts, found another number, and dialed. "Emma?" Olivia said when the other end picked up. "Emma, we did it." There was no answer, only crying. Emma Sullivan, the woman who had survived hell, the woman who looked at the scars on her wrists every day and wondered if it had been worth it, was sobbing into the phone now. Not the sobs of suffering, but the sobs of release. Olivia called Nicole next, then Sophia, and every call was the same, crying, a whispered thank you broken by sobs, the sound of women who had waited too long for this moment. 4 women, in 4 different places, crying for the same reason. Not because they were sad, but because at last, after everything, justice had been done. Olivia set the phone down and turned back to the window. Outside, the snow had stopped. The sky was slowly brightening, the dark clouds beginning to thin, revealing a pale band of blue at the horizon. She stood there alone in the silence, and for the first time in a long time, she felt like she could breathe. 3 months after Harrison Cole was arrested, the trial officially began. The federal courthouse in Chicago had never seen a case draw this kind of attention. Reporters poured in from across the country, cameras aimed at every corner, and hundreds of people stood outside holding signs in support of the victims. Inside the courtroom, Harrison Cole sat at the defense table, his expensive suit replaced by an orange prison uniform, and he faced 12 charges: sexual harassment, assault, witness intimidation, bribery, obstruction of justice. The list was so long the judge took nearly 10 minutes to read it aloud, and each charge was another brick in the wall that would hold him for years to come. 6 women took the witness stand one by one. Sophia Laurent, the young woman with eyes full of resolve, spoke about sleepless nights and the fear that had clung to her for months. Emma Sullivan, with faint scars on her wrists, spoke about the night she nearly gave up on everything and the reason she chose to keep living. Nicole Ward, holding tight to a photograph of her daughter, placed it silently on the table in front of the jury and said only 2 words, for her. Rachel Nguyen, the woman who had provided the decisive video, explained why she stayed silent and why she could not stay silent anymore. Each story was a piece, and when they were fitted together, they formed a picture of Harrison Cole that could not be denied. Olivia was the last to take the stand. She walked down the aisle between the benches, feeling hundreds of eyes on her, but she didn't look at anyone. She kept her gaze straight ahead, step after steady step, and when she sat in the witness chair, she drew in a deep breath. The prosecutor began asking questions, but Olivia didn't retell what happened that night. The video had done that. The other witnesses had done that. Instead, she spoke about what no one could see on the video. "That night, I didn't lose my job," she began, her voice ringing clearly through the silent courtroom. "I lost my belief that truth means something. I told the truth, and no one believed me. I was attacked, and no one helped. I knelt on the floor, picking up broken glass with bleeding hands, and the whole room watched, but no one spoke." She paused, her eyes fixed on Harrison, who was trying to avoid her gaze. "He didn't just make me fall. He wanted the whole room to see that someone like me doesn't have the right to speak. He wanted me to know my place. He wanted me to learn silence." She drew in a breath. "But I won't be silent, and I will never be silent." Harrison's lawyer stood, his eyes sharp as a vulture waiting for weakness. "Miss Carter," he began, contempt hidden beneath a veneer of false politeness. "You're just a server who wants fame and money from smearing a successful businessman, aren't you?" The courtroom held its breath. Olivia looked him straight in the eye, and she didn't shake. "I'm a woman who refuses to be silent," she said, her voice clear and strong, "and that scares men like you." The lawyer opened his mouth to say more, but the judge struck the gavel. "Enough. The witness may step down." Olivia rose and stepped down, her head held high. She didn't look at Harrison. She didn't need to. She'd said what needed to be said. The jury withdrew to deliberate, and 4 hours passed like 4 years. Olivia sat in the waiting room with Emma, Nicole, Sophia, and Rachel. No one spoke much. They only sat there, holding hands and waiting. When the bell sounded that the jury had reached a decision, Olivia's heart felt like it might leap out of her chest. They returned to the courtroom, and the room was so quiet you could hear each person breathe. The foreperson stood, holding a sheet of paper. On the charge of sexual harassment, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of assault, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of witness intimidation, we find the defendant guilty. Each word guilty rang out like a bell, and with every bell, Harrison Cole shrank a little more. 12 charges. 12 guilty verdicts. The judge delivered the sentence. 8 years in federal prison. No clemency. No early release. When the court officers stepped forward to cuff Harrison, he finally looked toward Olivia. His gaze was full of hatred, full of rage, full of disbelief that a server had been able to bring him down. Olivia looked back. No fear, no hatred, only the calm of someone who had survived the storm. "You don't have power here anymore," she said, low enough that only he could hear. Harrison said nothing. He couldn't say anything. He was led away through the side door into a life completely different from the one he'd known. A life behind bars. Outside the courthouse, Olivia stepped into the crowd of reporters and supporters. She didn't answer questions. She didn't make a statement. She only wanted to breathe clean air and feel the sunlight on her skin. And then she saw him. Vincent stood apart from the crowd, leaning against the familiar black SUV, his eyes never leaving her. He didn't come closer, didn't step into the cameras, didn't demand recognition. He only stood there in the shadows. And when their eyes met, he nodded. A small nod, but it said everything. And for the first time in many months, Olivia smiled. Not the forced smile meant to reassure others, not the smile that hid pain, but a real smile. From the deepest part of her, the smile of someone who had finally found justice. A week after the trial, Olivia's life began to settle back into something like normal, or at least a new version of normal. She found a job at a small cafe in Lincoln Square, where the owner was a middle-aged woman who had read Olivia's story and decided she deserved a fresh chance. The work wasn't glamorous like the Velvet Manor, and the pay was lower, but no one looked at her with contempt. No one stuck out a leg when she walked past, and that was enough. That morning, Olivia opened her mailbox as she always did, expecting the familiar bills, the familiar reminders of the crushing debt still pressing down on her shoulders. But instead, she found a letter from the bank. She opened it, and what she read made her read it 3 times to make sure she wasn't seeing things. Your loan has been paid in full. Current balance, $0. $87,000. The debt that had hunted her for 2 years, driven her to work until her body broke, made her afraid to dream of a better future. Gone. In a single night, she knew who it was. She didn't have to think. Only one person could do something like this, and leave no trace behind. And instead of gratitude, Olivia felt anger. Anger so sharp she crumpled the letter in her fist, threw on her coat, and stormed out. She found Vincent where she knew he'd be. The small coffee shop where they'd met for the first time. He sat alone at a corner table, an espresso in front of him, and when she walked in, he lifted his head as if he'd been waiting for her all along. Olivia walked straight to his table. She didn't sit. She only stood there, her eyes burning. "I don't need you to save me," she said, her voice trembling with the effort of holding back her rage. Vincent looked at her, his expression unchanged. "I know. Then why?" she demanded, louder now. "Why did you do it? I never asked you to pay my debt. I never wanted you to do that." Vincent was quiet for a moment. Then he lifted a hand and gestured to the chair across from him. "Sit down." Olivia wanted to refuse, wanted to turn away, but something in his voice made her sit. Maybe exhaustion, maybe curiosity, or maybe something else she didn't dare admit. "You deserve to start over without a burden," Vincent said, his voice low and unhurried. "You've fought enough. You've sacrificed enough. I only wanted you to have a chance to live for yourself, instead of living to pay debts you never created." Olivia shook her head, tears rising even as she fought them. "I don't want to owe you anything. I don't want to be tied to you by money." Vincent looked at her, and in those dark brown eyes that were usually cold, she saw something softer. "You don't owe me anything, Olivia. This is a gift. No conditions. No strings. If you want to stand up and walk away right now, never look at me again, you can. The debt is paid. It has nothing to do with anything between us." Olivia looked at him, and the question she'd been holding inside for so long finally slipped free. "Who are you really?" she asked, her voice quieter now. "I've heard the rumors about the Moretti family. About what you've done. I want the truth. From you." Vincent didn't answer right away. He stared into the coffee in front of him, and for a moment she saw him age 10 years. The lines around his eyes deepened. The darkness in his gaze grew heavier. "I've killed people, Olivia," he said, his voice flat as water before a storm. "Not once. Many times. That's the world I grew up in. That's the life I was taught." Olivia felt her blood turn cold, but she didn't stand. She didn't run. She only sat there and listened. "The first person I killed," Vincent continued, his eyes still on the coffee, "was the man who killed my mother. I was 15 when she died. My mother was harassed by a powerful politician. She refused, and she died for that refusal. My father was weak then, too afraid to touch a man with more power than him. So I waited. 8 years, and when I was strong enough, I went to that man." He lifted his head and looked straight into Olivia's eyes. "I don't regret it. I've never regretted it. He deserved what he got." Olivia didn't speak. She couldn't speak. It felt as if someone had drained all the air out of the room. She'd known Vincent was dangerous. She'd known he belonged to a world far from hers. But hearing him admit, plainly, that he had killed people was something else entirely. Vincent watched her and saw the shock in her eyes. He wasn't surprised. He'd prepared for this. "I understand if you want to leave," he said, gentle, but threaded with hidden pain. "I won't follow. I won't contact you. If you want me to disappear from your life, I'll do it." Olivia looked at him and asked the only question left in her mind. "Why are you telling me? You could keep it secret. You could lie. Why?" Vincent was silent for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice roughened, as if these words were being pulled from the deepest part of him. "Because you deserve the truth, and I don't want to hide anything from you." He paused and drew in a slow breath. "I've lived in the dark too long, Olivia. My whole life. And you." He looked at her, and for the first time she saw something in his eyes she had never seen before. Vulnerability. "You're the closest thing to light I've ever had." Olivia didn't answer. She couldn't. Too many feelings churned inside her. Fear, anger, confusion, and something else she didn't dare name. She stood and walked away. Without a word, without looking back, she felt the silence behind her and knew Vincent was watching her go. But he didn't chase her. He'd promised, and he kept his word. Inside the cafe, Vincent sat alone, the espresso gone cold in front of him. He was used to loss. He'd lost his mother, lost his childhood, lost the chance to live an ordinary life. Loss was the only thing he knew. But this time, as he watched Olivia's figure fade behind the glass door, he realized it hurt more than he expected. Much more. 3 days passed like 3 years. Olivia lay on her bed in her small apartment, staring up at the ceiling, and she couldn't stop thinking about Vincent, about what he'd said, about the way he'd looked at her when he confessed the darkest thing in his life, about the silence after she walked away, and how he didn't follow, just as he'd promised. She tried to forget. She tried to convince herself she'd made the right choice. Vincent Moretti was a killer. He belonged to a dark world she had no business touching. She should stay away, keep living her life, forget he ever existed. But every time she closed her eyes, she saw those dark brown eyes. Eyes that had looked at her with a vulnerability she knew he didn't show anyone else. Eyes that had said, "You're the closest thing to light I've ever had," as if it were the last true thing left in this world. She thought about Ryan, her ex-boyfriend, 3 years ago, powerful, dangerous, capable of hurting her in ways she'd never imagined. But Ryan wasn't Vincent. Ryan hid his danger behind a charming smile and sweet promises. Ryan made her believe he was perfect. And then when the door closed, when no one else could see, he became a monster. Ryan never showed her who he really was, not until it was too late. Vincent was different. Vincent had looked her in the eye and said he'd killed people. He didn't excuse it. He didn't justify it. He didn't try to make it sound better than what it was. He only told the truth, dark and bare, and he let her decide. Her phone vibrated. "Lucas," Olivia answered, forcing her voice to sound normal. "Sis, what's going on?" Lucas demanded immediately. No greeting, no small talk. "I've called you for 3 straight days and you answer like a robot. What's wrong?" "I'm fine," Olivia said, but even she didn't believe herself. There was a pause, then Lucas spoke again, softer. "You love someone, don't you?" Olivia almost dropped the phone. "How do you know?" "Because your voice sounds like it did when you talked about Ryan," Lucas said. "But it's different. That time you were scared to stay. This time..." He stopped, as if searching for the right words. "This time you're scared to lose." Olivia didn't speak. She couldn't, because Lucas was right. She wasn't afraid of Vincent. She wasn't afraid of what he'd done. She was afraid she'd walked away and might never see him again. "Sis," Lucas said, his voice steadier than his age. "I don't know who that person is. I don't know what happened. But I know you. You're the strongest person I've ever known. If you're afraid of losing someone, then maybe that person is worth fighting for." After she ended the call, Olivia sat up on the bed and looked toward the nightstand. Her mother's photograph was still there, as always, the gentle smile, the eyes full of love. Olivia reached for the photo, and tears began to spill. "What would you say, Mom?" she whispered. "What would you tell me to do?" And then, as if her mother were right beside her, she remembered a conversation from years ago. She'd been 17, just broken up with her first boyfriend after discovering he'd lied. She'd cried to her mother, said she never wanted to love again because she couldn't bear disappointment. And her mother had held her, stroked her hair, and spoken in the gentlest voice. "Don't love someone perfect, honey, because no one is perfect. People who seem perfect are only hiding the bad in them. Love the one who dares to show you they aren't perfect, the one who dares to show you both their dark side and their bright side, because that person trusts you, and you deserve to be loved by someone who trusts you." Olivia hugged the photo to her chest and cried. Cried for her mother, cried for herself. Cried for the man who was sitting alone somewhere in this city, believing he'd lost her for good. And when the tears ran dry, she knew what she had to do. Vincent's penthouse was on the top floor of the building in the Gold Coast, and when Olivia stepped out of the elevator, she saw him standing by the window, his back to her. He didn't turn around, but she knew he knew she was there. The building's security had surely told him. "I didn't think you'd come," Vincent said, his voice low and tired. He turned, and Olivia saw he looked different. Older, worn down, as if the past 3 days had taken 10 years from him. "I didn't think I would either," Olivia admitted. She moved closer, stopping a few steps away. "I don't know if you're a good man or a bad man," she said, meeting his eyes. Vincent looked at her, and didn't try to excuse himself or justify anything. "I don't know either," he admitted. Olivia nodded, as if that were the answer she'd expected. "But you're the only one who's shown me both," she said. "You showed me the good you're capable of, and the terrible things you've done. You didn't hide. You didn't lie. You let me see, and you let me choose." She took one more step, close enough that she could touch him if she wanted. "I choose to stay," she said. "Not because you saved me, not because you paid my debt, not because of anything you've done for me." She paused, and her voice softened. "But because you didn't make me someone who needed saving. You believed I could stand on my own. You only stood beside me and waited for me to decide." Vincent looked at her, and in those eyes that were usually cold, she saw something shining. Not tears. Vincent Moretti didn't cry, but something close to it. He lifted his hand. He didn't speak. He only held it out, palm up, an invitation that needed no words. Olivia looked at that hand, a hand that had done terrible things, a hand that had held hers in the dark when she was afraid. And she took it. No kiss, no grand promises, no dramatic declaration of love, only 2 hands woven together, and 2 people standing side by side at the window looking out over the city, finally no longer alone. 3 years later, spring returned to Chicago with warm winds and cherry blossoms blooming along the streets. Olivia stood in the auditorium at the University of Illinois, her eyes wet with tears, but they were tears of happiness. On the stage, Lucas Carter, wearing a deep blue graduation gown, was receiving the bachelor's degree he had finally completed, his gateway to medical school. When his name was called, when he stepped up to the podium with the brightest smile, Olivia couldn't hold back a sob. She had waited for this moment for too long. She had worked too much, sacrificed too much, just to see her brother stand where he deserved to stand. And now that it was truly happening, she felt as if her heart might burst with joy. Beside her, Vincent sat in silence, but his hand held hers tightly through the entire ceremony. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. His presence, the warmth of his hand, was enough. After the graduation, Lucas ran to hug his sister, and Olivia held him close, her tears soaking his shoulder. "You did it," Lucas whispered. "Didn't you?" Olivia asked, smiling through tears. "No, you," Lucas said. "You gave me this chance. You didn't give up. You're my hero." Olivia had changed too. She no longer worked at the cafe. She was a first-year social work student, on a full scholarship for people who had contributed to the community. By day, she went to class, and at night she volunteered at a center that supported abused women. She was building a new life. Not for anyone else, but for herself. One afternoon, Olivia was sitting in the familiar coffee shop in Lincoln Square, the place where she used to work and still stopped by often, when the door opened. A young woman walked in, maybe 22 or 23, her eyes red as if she'd been crying, her shoulders hunched as if she wanted to fold into herself so no one would see her. Olivia recognized that look immediately. The look of fear, the look of desperation, the look she herself had once carried. The young woman glanced around, then her gaze landed on Olivia. She hesitated, then walked over. "Excuse me, are you Olivia Carter? I read your story online. I don't know what to do. I don't know where to go. I just thought maybe you would understand." Olivia looked at the young woman and saw herself from a year ago. Afraid, alone, not knowing if anyone would believe her. Olivia smiled gently and pointed to the chair across from her. "Sit down, tell me." The young woman sat, and the words began to spill out, broken and jagged through tears. Olivia listened without interrupting, without judging, only listening. And when the young woman finished, Olivia took her hand. "You're not alone," Olivia said, her voice steady and warm. "You're never alone, and we're going to find a way through this, together." That evening, when the coffee shop had quieted, Vincent came in and sat at his usual corner. 2 espresso drinks already waiting on the table. Olivia finished her conversation with the young woman, gave her the support center's phone number, and promised to follow up, then walked over and sat across from Vincent. "You're building something important," Vincent said, his eyes following the young woman as she stepped out. Olivia smiled and took a sip of coffee. "I'm trying to become the person I needed when I was younger. The person I needed when Mom was sick, when I lost my job, when I thought no one believed me anymore. If I can be that person for someone else, then maybe everything I went through will mean something." Vincent nodded, and in his eyes that were usually cold, she saw admiration. "That's the best way to live," he said. Olivia tilted her head, studying him. "And what about you? What are you doing with your life?" Vincent was quiet for a moment, as if searching for the right words. Then he spoke, his voice softer than usual. "I'm learning how to live in the light, slowly. But I'm learning. You're teaching me." Olivia didn't answer. She only reached across the table and took his hand, and they sat in silence, 2 people who had been hurt too much, now healing each other. Olivia looked out the window. Chicago was waking under the spring sun. Warm golden rays poured through the glass, falling onto the table, falling onto their hands clasped tight together. She didn't know what the future would hold. She didn't know if she and Vincent would stay together forever. She didn't know if life would keep testing her. But she didn't need to know, because she had learned the most important thing. Dignity doesn't come from being saved by someone. It doesn't come from money, status, or other people's approval. It comes from the moment she chose not to be silent, even when the whole world wanted her to go quiet. It comes from standing back up every time she fell, even when no one believed she could stand again. And love, the love she found, wasn't about being protected from the dark. It wasn't about finding a perfect person with no stains. It was about finding someone willing to stand in the dark with her, hold her hand when she was afraid, and walk with her into the light. Vincent held her hand, silent as always, but it was no longer the silence of a lonely man. It was the silence of someone who had finally found where he belonged. And Olivia, for the first time in her life, wasn't afraid of anything anymore. Olivia and Vincent's story ends here, but its message will live on. This is a story about the power of speaking up, about the value of human dignity, and about never letting anyone make you believe you're not worth listening to. In real life, there are many people living through what Olivia lived through. People treated unfairly who don't dare speak because they fear the consequences. People who are hurt but have to hide their pain because no one believes them. If you are one of those people, remember you're not alone. Your voice matters. Your story deserves to be told. And there are always people ready to listen, ready to believe you, ready to stand beside you. Thank you for staying with this story all the way to the end. If this story touched your heart, if it made you think about life, about love, about the strength of refusing to be silent, please subscribe to our channel, tap like, and share this video so more people can hear it. Every subscription, every like, every share is motivation for us to keep bringing meaningful stories every day. We truly want to hear your thoughts. What do you think of Olivia and Vincent's story? Have you ever lived through moments like these in your own life? Have you ever had to choose between silence and speaking up? Share your story in the comments below. We read every comment, and we value every share from the depths of your hearts. Finally, we wish all of you watching this video good health, a joyful life, and peaceful days ahead. Remember that no matter how hard life gets, you still have the right to speak, you still have the right to be heard, and you deserve to be happy. Thank you once again, goodbye, and see you in the next video.